A 1, 2, 3, 4.
Welcome to my old stomping ground.
I lived in East London, about 10 miles away. But when I was about 8 or 9, we moved here to Welling in Kent, and I just love this place. It holds so many memories.
Because this is where I first fell in love with the music that was the soundtrack to my youth.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes, this takes me back. Syd Lawrence, Glenn Miller, Joe Loss, and of course the great Ted Heath. For me, these were the kings of the big band sound. Fabulous.
It was hot, sexy, and so seductive. And this is the music that made me want to dance. The big bands had everything, great tunes and tons of attitude. They were even used as a weapon during the Second World War.
After the fighting was over, the big bands had another battle on their hands. How to compete with an explosion of other forms of music.
Just how would they cope in a modern world of musical and social liberation? It was a battle for survival. With the record industry and the demands of the teenager pushing Britain's big bands towards extinction. It was a crazy time, but those early days were great.
When swing was king and top of the pile were the big bands. It's the Second World War, and Churchill had quite a bit on his plate down here in the security of the Cabinet War Rooms.
When he did get a chance to relax, apparently old Winston liked a bit of Gilbert and Sullivan.
Above ground, it was a different story and a different sound, and people just couldn't get enough of it.
Many of the musicians from Britain's big bands answered the call of King and Country. Some managed to join one of the military bands, like the Squadroneers.
And the coolest sound they were playing was the sound of swing. Swing was a popular form of jazz, dance music played by the big bands or the dance orchestras.
Swing was the hot new music from the States, made popular by the likes of Duke Ellington, Count Basie and Benny Goodman. Britain's bright young things were developing a taste for the transatlantic sound.
Clearly, American fashions and American culture generally were very influential in Britain at that particular period. And the big bands and the swing bands particularly were seen as part of that.
All those in favour of swing say aye! Aye! OK, let's swing!
British bands had a more bouncy, sweet, song-based style. But during the war, the music of Black America changed everything. And with victory far from certain, people wanted cheerful music to help brighten the mood.
Say aye!
The circumstances of wartime had a lot to do with it. It was that big sound, it was that quite opulent sound, I suppose, that is what you need to kind of lift the spirits.
Well, lots of British musicians loved it and accepted both the swing aspect of it and the innovations that the American musicians brought to the music. The public was, in terms of its popularity, was a bit slower. I mean, the public generally preferred the more sort of straightforward European sounds of the dance bands of the 20s and 30s. But by the 1940s, the American influence was becoming greater and greater.
During those desperate days of the Second World War, there was one man who perhaps did more than anyone else to make us snuggle up to swing. When Glenn Miller arrived in Blighty in 1944, his concerts were the hottest tickets in town.
I don't know how many he was actually on, but he or one of his organizations, there was just under 1,200 performances. He was a busy man, yeah.
He was not an out-and-out jazz band, you know, like the Benny Goodmans and the Artie Shaws. He was more commercial. There were always tunes that you could tap your foot, sing to. Everybody remembers all the Miller tunes, the big hits. There aren't many even pop artists that have as many tunes that can be remembered for so long.
Glenn Miller, String of Pearls, Chattanooga Choo-Choo, In the Mood, Kalamazoo.
Pennsylvania.
On and on and on. And one of the generals said, Mr. Miller, your music is next best thing to a letter from home.
The Glenn Miller sound caught on because it was so smooth and slick. But how precisely did he make his music swing like that? I asked my old mate Derek Scott to explain.
Glenn Miller's music gives you an opportunity to discover what the fundamental elements of swing are. And you can hear this in one of his best-known tunes. You begin a basic block of music, a chord. Now you break that up, not into a tune, do some repeating. Now that's a 3-beat rhythm, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So what about, to make it more interesting rhythmically, if we put a 2-beat rhythm against it? 1, 2, 1, 2. Now we've got this. What about if we loosen it up, make it more flexible? Ba, 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 ba. Now we're getting somewhere. Maybe we can leave that as our tune, but we need an accompaniment. What about using different devices? And one of the things Glenn Miller's fond of are stabs from his band. Bop, bop. Not bad. We are almost there. If I now push these chords just before the beat, instead of this, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, we just go ahead of that 4 and ahead of the next one, we get this 1, 2, 3, 4. See how it's just there. Put them together and we've got this. And so on. So finally, we've got swing and we're in the mood.
Some of Glenn Miller's arrangements may have been forged in the heat of the Second World War, but they're still setting toes tapping today.
Glenn Miller's been an incredible influence on the big band scene and really important. Most of the bands have traded on Glenn Miller. So Glenn Miller has kept a lot of musicians in work over 60 years. It's an incredible noise, really, when they all roar at you, and it's impossible not to enjoy it.
Miller offered the perfect tonic, seducing the nation with that smooth sound. But behind the music was a hard-headed mission. Glenn Miller wasn't just here to entertain.
Miller was working for the Allied cause, recording propaganda broadcasts in German that were aimed squarely at the enemy.
Soldaten, hier ist Major Glenn Miller persönlich.
Thank you, Ilse. You speak German very well. Ich kann nur sehr wenig Deutsch sprechen.
Oh, Herr Major Miller, es ist doch wirklich wunderbar. dass es für einen amerikanischen Musiker kein Verboten und keine Einschränkungen gibt. Gleichgültig ist, ob es amerikanische, deutsche, russische, chinesische oder jüdische Musik ist.
Ich verstehe Sie. America means freedom, and there's no expression of freedom quite so sincere as music.
Before long, propaganda swing would turn the radio and music into weapons of war.
While Churchill was in this very room plotting his next move, the Nazis were playing the same game. Oh yes, they knew all about the power of jazz and swing.
Reich's propaganda minister Goebbels had this bright idea that by getting American swing, jazz and blues and getting it recreated, putting Nazi lyrics, vicious in many cases, lyrics over this music, and then playing it back to the Allies over shortwave radio, would actually undermine our morale.
I double dare you to venture a raid. I double dare you to try and invade.
Singer Carl Schwedler led the Nazis' very own swing band, dubbed Charlie and his Orchestra. Incredible, since the Nazis had already outlawed degenerate jazz and swing in Germany.
I double dare you.
Carl Schwedler was given permission to travel through occupied countries and neutral Sweden, collect all the latest American hits of the day, take them back to Berlin, and all these little writers and musicians in the propaganda ministry would actually rewrite the lyrics. I mean, in the early days, 1939, 1940, they were actually quite humorous in their way, but as the war turned, they became absolutely vicious.
Let's go bombing. Oh, let's go bombing.
They underestimated British irony, and I think that whoever probably listened to these propaganda broadcasts, knowing the British, if they were soldiers, they're probably making V signs at the radio and just carrying on.
Let's go shelling where they're dwelling. Let's shell churches, women, children too.
This is almost unbelievable. I mean, Hitler hates swing. Goebbels hates swing. Swing tanzen verboten. Swing dancing prohibited. And yet, they pay the salaries of an entire swing band to broadcast on the radio.
Here's Mr. Churchill's latest song dedicated to Great Britain. I never cared for you before, Hong Kong, Burma, Singapore. Bye, bye, Empire.
In the 40s, big bands were giving the punters what they wanted. Exciting music that they could dance to. It's simple. A bunch of blokes blowing out a hot sound, and then something else happens.
Ivy Benson certainly turned a few heads. A woman leading an all-female big band. Whatever next? Small but feisty, Ivy created her own big band sound, and she wanted the best female musicians she could find.
Ivy spotted a gap in the market. With so many male musicians away in military action, it was time for the women to step up to the plate.
Young singers like Gloria Russell were catapulted into an unfamiliar world of glamour and excitement.
It's a telegram for you, Gloria. And I said, what is it, Mum? She said, it's from Ivy Benson saying she wants you to join her. I was so excited. She said, meet us up in London in Paddington Station. So I had to go up to Paddington Station. I'd never left Exeter before to go to London. And then we met the band. And I said, where are we going, you know? And they said, Germany. I was shocked.
Ivy and the band were among the first entertainers to brave the ruins of post-war Berlin, and Germany was just the start of it.
So there you are, you're in a well-paid, glamorous job,
yeah,
touring the world. How did you feel?
I felt fantastic. No, I thought we were all did pretty good for an all-girl orchestra. I mean, let's face it, they played for the troops and the troops loved them.
Ivy knew what her audience wanted, but she was also a strict disciplinarian, and her girls respected her for it. Big band broadcaster Sheila Tracy spent a couple of memorable years playing trombone in the band. There you are in your gorgeous strapless dress and that, right up there belting out those tunes. How did you feel?
How did I feel?
Yeah.
I thought it was the height of glamour. Orange strapless dresses with green ivy leaves appliqué down the front. I remember them so well.
And I should imagine, you know, all those girls, you're in this orchestra, you're in glamorous seaside resorts. Surely, you know, afterwards, would you drift off and go and meet some boys or whatever? Or was Ivy very strict about all that?
Len, dear, I was born in Helston, Cornwall. I went to Truro High School. Didn't do things like that, dear.
Quite right.
No, dear. Didn't behave like that in those days, did we? It must have been the same for you.
Indeed it was. What was Ivy like as a band leader?
Strict.
Oh, really?
Oh, she wouldn't stand for any nonsense, Ivy. No. If you were in the Ivy Benson band, you behaved yourself. And if you didn't play well, you were out.
Was there a special type of audience that would come because it was an all-female band?
Well, have your guess.
I would, yeah. Yeah.
Yes, I think, yes, it used to draw a pretty big audience, female band. Yeah. I mean, the men were very sort of, you know, a bit sort of snooty about it, saying, oh, a lot of girls, you know, best they can do.
Yeah. But in actual fact, I think the band, what I've heard, you know, stood up against any of the male bands.
Oh, yes. Ivy ran a very, very good band indeed.
Ivy ruffled a few feathers. A woman from Yorkshire playing the music of men from America was too much for some people. Things came to a head during a meeting of the Band Leaders Association.
I was the only girl band leader there. And I think it was Billy Turner, if I'm not mistaken. He just stood up. Joe was there. And they were all, Morris Winnick, they were all sitting there. And Billy said, oh, damn girl band leaders in this organisation. So I just stood up and said, OK, and I left it.
It may have been a man's world, but one of the country's most popular band leaders spoke up for Ivy.
And Joe stood up for me, Joe Laws. He said, oh, give her a chance. It's big enough fight for her without you pulling her out of an association. I said, no, I'm out. And when I really mean something, I mean it. And I stopped out and I never went back.
Ivy was a product of the war, just like her male contemporaries, including one man who was to become one of our finest and most successful band leaders ever. Ted Heath was a talented trombone player who, like a lot of musicians, had started in a local brass band. Ted's aim was to be the best, and after the war, he was able to take advantage of the ongoing row between unions representing British and American musicians. In an effort to protect jobs, a tit-for-tat band stopped orchestras crisscrossing the Atlantic. Brits like Ted had the country to themselves. Funnily enough, the band didn't apply to the singers. They weren't members of the Musicians' Union. They were classed as entertainers. When American singers like Ella Fitzgerald came over here, Ted offered his services, and they played together at the London Palladium. Yes, there was isolation, but for Ted Heath and other band leaders, this was a great time, when British swing was pulling in the crowds. Ted hired the best musicians and paid the best wages. In return, he demanded the highest standards. And once he had the offer of work at the BBC, his career took off.
Listen to my music, and it's the music of Ted Heath from the BBC studios in London.
And working for Auntie, put you at the top of the bill. At this point, Ted Heath was actually losing money, generously paying out more than the BBC rate for musicians. But he knew radio was the key to success. It's where you got exposure and helped get an audience in for those live gigs.
Sitting in the sun, counting my money, fanned by a summer breeze.
Ted understood the new business model. Get on the radio, sell records, and play packed concerts. It was a circular success.
Are in my bank account, sitting in the sun, counting my money.
Ted produced an enormous back catalogue of work, and it's held here at the Leeds College of Music. Dr. Catherine Tackley is a big fan and plays many of Ted's numbers with her own band.
Oh, well, this is an amazing collection, actually, of, it looks like a huge number of charts that the Ted Heath Band used to play. They're all in boxes here, listed in alphabetical order, so you can obviously have a look in and see what sort of survived from that era when the band were prolific. We're just looking here. Let me take this one. Oh, this one's called The Creep, which is quite a well-known Ted Heath number. Let's see what we've got. Okay, well, we've got a score here. So that's the parts for all the instruments written out. So we've got the trumpets, the trombones, and the rhythm section parts. And you can see it's been written in pencil. So this is probably, well, this would have been what the arranger wrote out. And then at a later stage, these other indications have been added in red and green pencil. Here, actually, it's quite interesting. On the third saxophone line down, which would probably usually be the first tenor part, there's something that says ad lib in brackets, and then it's just indications of the harmony given. So that would be for an improvised solo. So that's quite a nice thing to find. So the arranger would produce something like that, pass it over to a copyist. And then you can see here, these are the individual parts that would go to each musician. And instead of being labelled first trombone or guitar or bass or whatever, they're actually labelled with the names of the people that were to play them. So we've got Rick here, Wally. I suspect these are trombone parts, actually. Don, this one says, that's could be Don Lusher. So yeah, and you've got the whole set of parts here. So again, you could get this out and play it, and it would still work, I think. What Ted Heath managed to do, I think, was to steer that path between satisfying the hot jazz fans, as they were called back in the 40s, and also retaining that sort of popular appeal and currency as well.
Ted Heath was the band leader everyone wanted to work for. Just ask legendary trumpeter Ronnie Hughes. What was it about Ted's band that made everybody want to play? Was it the fact of the kudos of being a part of it? Did he pay more money?
He paid a lot more money. I left Teddy Foss at Wimbledon Pally and I was getting 16 quid a week, which was in those days not bad. And my first week with Ted Heath, but it was a very busy week, I got 60 quid. But for that 60 quid, I worked like I'd never worked before in my life. We'd do the variety show, 2 shows. We'd go in the morning to Earlin Hall and rehearse a broadcast. We'd go to Decca in the afternoon and do some recording. Then we'd go to the theatre and do our 2 shows, and then rush back and do live 11 o'clock at night at the Earlin Hall broadcast. Really? That was the sort of thing you did.
Yeah. And I suppose the track that most people would know from the Ted Heath Band was Hot Toddy. Were you a part of that?
That was me. I played the famous solo in Hot Toddy. That's a marvellous story. You know, you go into a studio and you've got the music in front of you. And if you're a jazz musician, you extemporise. So there's no tune to play, but they put the chord symbol so that you play it on the right chords. That's all I had. I had these chords and I played, okay. We did it again and we rehearsed it again, and when we did a couple of takes, I didn't know what I played. I played something different every time. Some weeks later, when it became obvious that it was going to be a hit, Ted came up to me and he said, "We're going to play Hot Toddy tonight." So I said, "Oh, fine." So we played it on the dance or wherever we were, and I played something.
Yeah.
And he came up to me afterwards and said, "Listen, mate." I said, "Yes, Ted, yes. That Hot Toddy, I want you to play what you played on the record." And I said, "I don't remember what I played on the record." He says, "Well, go and buy the record."
Oh, really?
That was...
Yeah.
Ronnie was just one of the amazing musicians in Ted Heath's lineup. Together they developed a unique style and a sound that was selling. This man was a huge hit. He may not have had the looks of a pop star, but believe me, he certainly was. Ted Heath went on to sell 20 million records and made more than 100 albums. He was a phenomenon, but his relationship with the BBC hadn't always been so positive. His contract was terminated and they showed him the door. According to Heath, the corporation found his sound aggressively modern. Their research showed his kind of music was deplored by middle-aged listeners, to whom it was incomprehensible. But in the clubs and theatres, a younger crowd was lapping it up. They started to get a reputation for rowdiness. I used to go myself, but to me, it always seemed a bit innocent.
You might meet a girl, take her home, get a kiss if you were lucky, or you just sit there having a few drinks with your mates.
Rarely did you get any trouble, but back in the day, the big band crowds were viewed with suspicion. There's a great line here from Ted Heath's memoirs. He's explaining how he tried to get a slot at the London Palladium, but needed to persuade the boss, Val Parnell. Ted says he'd heard about swing fans. They were, he felt, more than a little on the rowdy side and given to jitterbugging and other noisy and even destructive forms of exhibitionism. Eventually, Parnell gave in, but only after Ted agreed to cover the costs of any damage done to the carpet and theatre fittings.
Be mine, little baby. Say that you'll be mine.
The dance halls had a problem. People wanted to dance. But now there were all sorts of dance styles to accommodate, including the swing dances.
Say that you'll be mine, little baby. Stop your hesitating.
This is Biggin Hill, just south of London, and I've got an invite to the local jive club.
If you say yes, I will give my...
It's strange looking back, but music had to be divided up. Some numbers for those who wanted a waltz or foxtrot, others for the jivers. If people didn't behave, they'd put a spotlight on you, and you were in trouble for illegal jiving. I tell you what, you couldn't tell this lot that.
What do you think it is about swing music that makes everybody love to dance?
Well, I think it's the joie de vivre, Len, and all ages can enjoy it.
The sound is superb and just makes you want to get up and have a dance. Yeah. It really, really does.
Now, if you say yes, I will give my heart to you, baby. And if you say no, then you'll break my heart in two. Say that you'll be mine, little baby. What's the use of scheming? Tell me I ain't dreaming. Be mine, little baby.
Oh, hey, hey! Oh, what a team! This was something that kind of threatened that status quo of ballroom couple dancing, where, you know, by and large both feet remained on the floor, and people saw it. It was a new thing. People saw it as a threat. There was certainly a sense that these new trends of jive and jitterbugging that had come from across the Atlantic were kind of incorporated into what people were doing in the ballrooms, and that wasn't always welcomed by people that were in charge of the dance halls at the time.
Lady, come out of that jungle. There was a clash of cultures on the dance floor as Britain's musical tastes changed. There seemed to be a mad mix of music. Before the war, there hadn't been so much choice, but now it was all there on a plate.
You may think everybody was into rock and roll and then the Beatles, but in reality, there was an incredible rich mix of popular music. It was truly a very special time.
Musical success was once defined by the sale of sheet music, but in the 50s, teenagers had money to spend on the latest hits on new vinyl. The record industry as we know it was born.
The gramophone industry cashes in on the well-off teenagers to some tune. 80% of the disc output is bought by the youngsters. That's 50 million records a year in Britain alone. All industry knows that to please the teenagers is the golden way to big dividends.
But it's never just about the music. It's everything that goes with it, including the espresso bars where you'd hang out with your mates.
Good to see you. How are you? Good.
Like me, Pete Conway loves the music from the 50s and 60s. We both worked with big bands. I was dancing alongside them. He was often a support act, doing his stand-up comic routine or singing along when he got the chance.
You know, Pete, there was this period when everything seemed to go a bit crazy. And in the charts at that time, you could get everything from Elvis Presley and rock and roll, Dickie Valentine, Dennis Lotus, Ted Heath. It was all a sort of a mix.
Started in the mid-50s, coffee bars, jukeboxes in the coffee bar. Come down and do this sort of thing.
Yeah.
And music was changing. Our parents had those wonderful Vera Lynn, Gracie Fields, people, that different music altogether, and then suddenly the big bands. And after the big bands, of course, came the jazz, traditional jazz, trad jazz, Chris Barber, who used to play in the Akka, who used to play in the coffee bars. And then, of course, rock and roll in the mid-late 50s. Tommy Steele came along, and Elvis, and Gene Vincent, Bill Haley.
Yeah.
And it was a big change. The whole thing changed. But the big bands were still there because the big bands still had music in the charts in the 50s.
Yeah, you had Swinging Shepherd Blues,
That was right.
Toddy.
Yes.
Yeah, and then suddenly Stranger on the Shore, Ackerbill. And this was all in amongst all this other rock and roll and Buddy Holly and everything
Monty
else.
Sunshine, who
Petit Fleur.
Petit Fleur, who was with Chris Barber.
Yeah, it was an absolute bizarre mix of everything you could think of. And I don't know, it sort of crept up on us. You know what I mean?
Yes.
In Welling, suddenly there was a coffee bar.
Yes.
Frothy coffee. Oh, it was...
Ours was Emmanuel's.
Oh,
Emmanuel's
yeah.
coffee bar. It was
Ours
the only
was-
one we had in town.
The big problem, you know, if you were in a coffee bar chatting up a girl,
Yeah.
and there you were, and you sort of felt quite smooth. There, it would be in a glass cup actually,
It was,
and then
yeah.
you'd say, "Oh, fabulous in here," and you'd take a sip, and then you'd.
That's why I am touched up.
Yeah.
They were great days.
They were great days.
They were wonderful days.
Yeah.
With pop stars all the rage, some of the big bands started to lose top billing as the spotlight settled on the singers.
It was a great time to be a vocalist. With your name in lights, it was a chance to shine, and there were plenty who took their moment in the sun.
When the stars make you drool just like a pasta fazool, that's amore. When you dance...
Dennis Lotus was a South African who hit the big time in the UK when he hooked up with Ted Heath in the early 50s.
When you walk in a dream, but you know you're not dreaming, signore. Scusami, but you see, back in old Napoli, that's amore.
And what made Dennis a bit different is that he successfully crossed the divide between singing and light entertainment.
Had no intention of working with a band. I wanted to be song and dance man. I wanted to be Fred Astaire.
Bells will ring, ting-a-ling-a-ling, ting-a-ling-a-ling, and you'll sing Vita Bella.
I did have a letter of introduction, in fact, to Ted Heath. I went to the Palladium to see him, and I sat in the audience and listened to this band, and I thought, to hell with Fred Astaire. I want to sing with this band. It was just knocked me out. It was fantastic.
Do you think that I care. If you're here or you're there, if you make up your mind to stay or go.
He said, we're doing a recording session at Decca next week. Come along then. You can sing a couple of songs for me. So that's exactly what I did. Forget your troubles, just get happy. Chase your cares away, shout hallelujah. Yeah, fantastic. I sang that and Try a Little Tenderness. And that was it. Fine, he said, you can join the band. And the following week I was with the Ted Heath Band, first concert with the Shoreditch Town Hall. And I was sitting on the stage next to Dickie Valentine and Lita Rosa. And that was my beginning with the Ted Heath Band. It was the most popular band in the country. All the places we played were always full of people. Screams and frantic applause. I mean, in Blackpool, at the Winter Gardens, I said to Dickie, look at them all. I said, I think we could walk over their heads. There were so many people there. I learned so much about music from that band, from all the guys, not only from Ted, because I was with guys who knew what they were talking about. It's a highlight of my life, quite frankly.
Good, love it.
While singers like Dennis carved out a new career, by the mid-50s, the Musicians' Union ban that stopped bands crisscrossing the Atlantic was over. And for Ted Heath, it was a chance to sail to the States and show the Yanks what the Brits could do. Little did he know that he was stepping into a world of racial turmoil and tension. Ted Heath's son, Tim, has raided the attic to give me a glimpse of that legendary tour.
This is cine footage from the family archives, and some of this has just never ever been seen outside the family before. And all of this is from the American tour of 1956. My mother and father going out on the Queen Mary en route to the US tour. And the whole band went on the Queen Mary too. My dad insisted that the band travel in style and that they should arrive in style in New York,
right,
in British style.
Of course. They're fantastic. And this tour was mainly of the southern states, wasn't it?
It was
not?
principally of the southern states.
Yeah.
Most of the gigs were in the southern states. Here's a poster of the concert with the billing of Ted Heath, Nat King Cole, June Christie, and the Four Freshmen.
There. Yeah. And of course, Ted Heath's top of the bill.
He is on that poster there.
Yeah, yeah.
Even though Nat King, there's the truck, the equipment truck with Nat King Cole and Ted Heath on the side of it.
Yeah. You know, there must have been such a buzz for the whole band. You know, off we go. You know, because they're all guys that I guess originally were either the Salvation Army or brass bands or worked during the time in the forces.
Yes.
And then suddenly, here they go. They're on the Queen Mary.
Going out to America.
And floating down the Mississippi.
I know.
Yeah.
What a fantastic... They loved it. I mean, it was a fantastic experience for them.
Yeah.
He may have been a big star, but in the southern states of America, Nat King Cole wasn't guaranteed a warm welcome by everyone.
When they got to Birmingham, Alabama, there was a sense of tension there. And it started off, the concert started off right. My father played the first half, and that was all, everything was fine. And then when Nat King Cole came on, the promoters there wanted to have a gauze curtain lowered down the middle of the stage to separate my father's band on the back of the stage, who were backing Nat King Cole during the second half, and the Nat King Cole trio, who were at the front of the stage. They didn't think it was appropriate to have black musicians appearing on the same stage with white musicians. That's how bad it was. Right. Nat King Cole played the first number in the second half with the gauze curtain down, and it all went fine. And my dad suggested that the gauze curtain was raised because everything was going so well. And then when the curtain got raised, these white guys came charging down the aisles, and they jumped on the stage. They knocked Nat King Cole over and started to assault him. And the whole thing turned to pandemonium. There were a lot of police there because they sensed there was going to be something going on. They sensed there was going to be an incident. And the police went on stage and broke it up and arrested these men who went on stage. But it was absolute pandemonium, and it was very dangerous. It was a very ghastly, horrible situation.
Yeah. Oh, baby, look what you done to me.
Many were appalled at how one of the world's biggest singing stars had been treated. Ted's tour of the States was now front page news.
So did the concert grind to a halt, or what happened?
The concern was that it would turn into a full-scale riot. It was one of the promoters' idea to play the national anthem. And of course he didn't know the American national anthem, so he played God Save the Queen.
Despite problems in the Deep South, the American tour established Ted on the global stage and proved the Brits could cut it with the best. Back home, British swing was going through a bit of a purple patch. Johnny Dankworth, Joe Loss and Ken McIntosh were all pulling in the crowds and taking the music in different directions. One of the tricks of swing was to take a standard tune and give it a new twist. Singer Claire Teal has agreed to show me just how a song can be made to swing in any number of ways.
Fantastico! Oh, yes. It's a funny thing, when I listen to Glenn Miller or I listen to Ted Heath, you'll hear the same song, yet somehow it's a totally different arrangement and it comes over in a different way.
Yeah.
Some swing, some are a little bit more gentle, you know? And I can't really put my finger on why that is and what really defines swing.
Well, I think it's one of those things that you don't need to. We don't need to think too much about it because you could ask a million people the same question and you get a million different answers. If you put somebody like Count Basie against somebody like Stan Kenton, it's a massive difference that we can all hear, but, you know, spending hours debating on why it's different, I'd rather just put the records on and enjoy them. So we'll do a little demonstration for you to kind of demonstrate a little bit about how you can reinterpret a song in a million different ways, but we'll try and do this quite quickly for you. Can you give me the intro there, Grant, please? We'll start off. This is, I guess, how it would have felt when it was written, mid-20s. It would have been very precise. Picture you upon my knee, T for two and two for tea, you for me and me for you alone. So quite pedestrian there. There's not much to swing, we're kind of more waving, eh?
Yeah, and we're tripping along.
We're tripping along, but it's quite jolly and jaunty.
It is.
So then if we move sort of to, I don't know, say the mid-40s or 30s or 40s, any of that swing era, or something like perhaps that Ella and Basie did, let's to a kind of a medium groove swing. Picture you upon my knee, T for two and two for two, you for me and me for you alone. Nobody near us, see us or hear us, friends, relations. Okay. I was quite enjoying that. That was, so you can see there was a lot of swing there.
That's right. That really, compared with the first one, which was light and frothy, now we're getting into it.
And that was quite a hard swing, wasn't it? That was good.
Yeah.
But let's push it now very far in one direction. So when somebody like the great Anita O'Day would get her chops on a song like Tea for Two, this is what she did at the Newport Jazz Festival in 1958.
Picture you upon my knee, tea for two and two for tea. Can't you see how happy we could be? And all you need to see us here as friends. At least we'll go vacation, we'll have it known. We own a telephone, dear. Donald Reagan, you'll awake and start to bake a sugar cake for me to take for all the boys to see. We could raise a family, boy for you, girl for me. Can't you see how happy we could be, we three? Woo! Yeah. Oh, come on.
I can imagine being at Newport and Anita O'Day says, well, we're going to go into tea for two now, and everybody going, oh, no. And then suddenly, you know, and that's what's great about music, I think. You can take a simple tune and make it into anything you want. I've always said that dancing is dependent on the music. But I think if you can't dance to swing, then it's, you know, I always...
Something wrong with you.
There's something wrong with you.
For many big bands, dancing remained their bread and butter, but they were constantly having to adapt to all sorts of fads and fashions.
As pop became king, so did the rise of popular dancing. I'm not talking about ballroom or even jiving, but new, novelty, silly dances. People were coming up with one after the other.
There's no end to the spate of new dances. Watch The Locomotion being demonstrated at a West End studio.
The Locomotion. The Bossa Nova.
Also in the repertoire, worthy of your attention, is The Slop.
The Slop? Now here's a dance I used to do. Joe Loss, the March of the Mods. Good grief. Early 60s, Joe Loss brought out a record called The March of the Mods. And for a month or so, it was a big craze. All the Mecca ballrooms used to do it. Ready, and heel, toe, heel, toe, heel, toe, heel, toe, jump, back, run. Wa-da-da-da-da, diddly-umpa, inka, umpa, epa, hoi, hoi. And off you go again, diddly-umpa, umpa, 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 And now you start again. We've got the 12-inch version here. It's 9.5 minutes.
The big bands were doing what musicians have always done, adapting to the times and making music that sells. But money trouble was looming.
Fantastic.
And now the accountants were calling the tune.
Economically, big bands became less and less viable. It became simply cheaper to present and to record guitar groups, 4 young men, 3 guitarists and a drummer, rather than 20 or 22 people on stage all together, all having to be paid. The generational division became much more marked then than it had done previously. Lots of people in the music business had grown up in the big band era, hated rock and roll, they thought it was a passing fad. And people who were in these positions of authority in the music business particularly were hoping that it would just go away if they closed their eyes. And unfortunately for them, it didn't.
There was still a market for big bands in the 60s, but finding a place to play could be tricky. There were now huge competition for space. The old venues and dance halls were being used for other things. Bingo, casinos, and of course, beauty contests.
And then there was television. When Ted Heath lost his slot at the London Palladium, it was to make way for the TV cameras and a new age of variety entertainment. We grew up with those early days of television, but many people feared that the box in the living room would take over. Another nail in the coffin for big bands and all sorts of live music and entertainment. But one fella had a cunning plan and embraced the move from the dance halls to the TV studios. Syd Lawrence was a talented and experienced trumpet player. In 1967, he set up his own band in Manchester, making records, but also appearing on popular TV variety shows like Morecambe and Wise. Trombonist Chris Dean took over the orchestra in the mid-90s.
I remember when I first joined the band, we used to do the Morecambe Wise shows. We were never off television.
Glenn Miller.
Oh, Glenn Miller.
What a band that was, eh?
Loved Glenn Miller.
All that jitterbugging and everything?
In those days.
Oh,
fabulous.
knockout it was.
Don't play music like that anymore, do they?
I'm afraid they do, yes.
They do?
Oh, yes, ladies and gentlemen, under duress, Syd Lawrence and his orchestra.
He had a Royal Variety performance, then all the Pebble Mills, and he was on TV, and it was more a band that was in showbiz as opposed to out-and-out jazz or out-and-out big band stuff. He obviously got a lot of work as a result of the television. And for many years he traded on that television. And when I first joined the band, we were doing 270 dates a year. And now there aren't that many places to play.
The music was still great, but the world was moving on. By the 70s, the big band sound seemed less relevant. Condemned by some as easy listening, the records were moved to the back of the shop. There were those, though, who refused to let the big band sound die.
I've been invited to a reunion. A load of big band musicians meet up every now and again in this village hall in Surrey and have a blimmin' good blow. Oh, come on.
There's some real legends in this band of volunteers. Top flight players with a lifetime of experience.
Len, I've had the most incredible career. I mean, I was lucky enough to play with Sinatra every time he came to Europe, Judy Garland, and all the rest of them. So I've had a marvellous, wonderful career.
Bill Geldard's played trombone almost since it was invented.
You still want to come along here and play with the guys. What is it about it that makes you want to do that?
I don't know what I'd do if I didn't, to be quite honest. To play with good players, to lift. It really is. There's nothing quite like it.
You've been in the business all your life.
All my life, literally.
And yet you still find joy and just love to do it. And I think that is so wonderful.
Well, that's it. That's the way I feel.
Yeah.
I love doing it. And I don't want to stop doing it. I don't like the alternative.
No, of course. Oh, fantastic. Honestly, I've got to speak to you, truly hair-raising. That was fantastic. I tell you, I've had a crazy time, and it's great to look back. But you know, for me, the thing is, swing music is still here, right in the present, and I just hope it's going to still be with us in the future. Fabulous.
Pete Conway also believes there's a rosy future for big bands. And so does his son, Robbie.
Do nothing till you hear from me. Pay no attention to what I say.
He's helping to bring the swing sound to a whole new audience.
It's over my head. Do nothing till you hear from me.
when he was growing up and he was learning about music, we used to sing songs. I'd have it on stereo in the car, and we used to sing songs of this swing era. I remember we sang Do Nothing Till You Hear From Me, and he'd be about 9. And that's the song we're singing together. And we sang it when he was 9.
I've been untrue while we're apart. The words in my heart reveal how I feel about you. Some kiss may cloud my memory.
It was in here, right from when he was very, very young.
But please do nothing to you.
I retired a little while ago, and I've had a new resurgence again to come out and sing with a big band behind me. And for an old pro like myself, it's sent from heaven. It's great.
The sound of big bands and swing has been around since the 1930s, and it's starting to come full circle.
You can go up and down the country, you know, on a Saturday night, and there will be big band gigs being put on. Often it's sort of semi-pro or amateurs, and they're still playing this music from the 30s, the 40s, the 50s. So that music has still got a sense of longevity.
It's never going to go back to the glory days that it had, but this music is not going away. It's part of our culture.
With swing, what is really good has stayed. It makes you want to dance, it makes you want to tap your feet. It really is exciting when you get 8 brass hammering away at you in that big wall of sound. It's very, very exciting.
It's timeless. You can understand why this kind of music just swept the world.
Yeah.
It connects with us so strongly.
And one man helped to make that connection more than most. On December the 15th, 1944, newly promoted Major Glenn Miller left RAF Twinwood near Bedford in a single-engine aircraft bound for Paris. He was never seen again. We'll probably never know exactly what happened.
Major Glenn Miller, the well-known American band leader, is reported missing. He left England by air for Paris 9 days ago.
In the few months he'd been based in Britain, Glenn Miller and his orchestra played an extraordinary number of concerts and broadcasts. During that time, we'd really taken him and the big band sound of swing to our hearts.
He gave us a musical style that we'll treasure forever. It was music that united people. And what happened afterwards? Well, there was so much musical choice, with all of it competing for our attention. Yet in a funny way, we've now come full circle. Today, there's nothing like a big band for a party or a celebration. Everyone seems to have an affection for it. And you know what? When I hear Glenn Miller's music drifting lazily through the air, I can really understand why.